Hi there, this is David at TED-IELTS, and today I'm back with another grammar lesson. We're going to learn how to use the word however. This is something that a lot of people find kind of tricky, and there are a few different rules for using it. So I'm going to break these down as simply as I can, show you how to use this word with the right kind of punctuation, and hopefully by the end of the lesson, you'll understand it correctly and be able to write better essays. On the screen here, we can see 4 sentences that include the word however, and you can see that each of them is a little different. They have different positions in the sentence or different punctuation marks that they're used with. The first 3 are conjunctive adverbs, and the last one is an adverb. And we're going to look at each of these considering them to be their own basic rules. First of all, hopefully everybody knows the meaning of however, which is basically the same as but. If we have a sentence and then another sentence that shows a very contrasting idea, we might use however or but. They're basically the same, but one is more formal than the other, and that's the word however. They are actually different parts of speech and they require different punctuation, as we'll see in a moment. Here we can see we have however can be correctly used, but can be correctly used. But if you try to interchange them, you try to take a sentence with but and put however into it without changing the punctuation. Even though the meaning is the same, the sentence will be grammatically incorrect. We'll come back to this later and discuss it in a little more detail. So first of all, we'll start with the most common rule, which is putting however at the beginning of a sentence. So if we have a sentence like the meeting finished, and then another sentence that adds something very surprising, such as many people stayed behind to talk, then we can use however to connect these ideas. Why is this surprising? Well, when a meeting's finished, you expect everyone to go home, right? So if they stay behind, it's like, wow, that's a surprise. So we're going to use a word like but or however to connect these. We use however because it's more formal than but also we use it because it's a different part of speech. We can see here we've got our first sentence, then we have a full stop, which in American English is called a period. Then we have our conjunctive adverb, however. Then we have a comma. Then we have the second sentence. So this structure is actually used with lots of conjunctive adverbs. We can use words like therefore or meanwhile, but we've of course got to pay attention to the specific meaning, and here this word shows the correct degree of contrast between these ideas. We can see some more examples here. You may notice that these are a lot longer. Why are they longer? Well, usually when we have a long first sentence and a long second sentence and we contrast them in this way, we're going to use however. When the sentences are shorter, we're more likely to use but because short sentences are common in informal writing. And if they're shorter and closely related, we might not use a full stop to start a new sentence. We might use something different. We'll see that here. So this is our second rule, and you can see it's very similar. In fact, all the words are the same. So what's different? Instead of a full stop, we have a semicolon here. So this means that our 2 sentences are now just 1 sentence. So what's changed here? The meaning is actually basically the same. And in this case, having 2 sentences or 1 sentence, they're both correct. The difference is essentially that when we make them into 1 sentence, the ideas are considered more closely related, and usually the sentences or clauses are shorter. So here you can see the meeting finished is 3 words, and many people stayed behind to talk is also quite a short clause. Because they have a close meaning and they're short, we're more likely to use a semicolon to link them than to make them into individual sentences. So here our structure is our first clause, then a semicolon, then our conjunctive adverb, then our comma, then our second clause. We can see some more examples here. So you can see that the clauses don't need to be incredibly short, but these are shorter than the previous set of examples. Basically, the meaning for these sentences or these clauses are really closely linked. So when we say the company reported record-breaking profits this quarter and stock prices continued to drop due to market uncertainty, the reader immediately gets the connection. There's no major thinking involved here. Because they're closely linked, we can just use a semicolon and however. If you're ever really unsure about this, just make it two sentences. To make them into two sentences with a full stop, it's always going to be right. If you feel that it really should be one idea and one closely connected sentence, then you can confidently use a semicolon. So the first two rules, I think most of you probably already knew pretty well, but this third one quite often surprises and confuses people. Here, we're using however as a conjunctive adverb to link two sentences again, and it's the same sentences. But instead of putting it exactly in the middle, we're inserting it into the middle of the second clause. We can see here we have two commas around the word however. And whenever we insert a word into a clause like this, into a sentence, we should use two commas around it to set it apart. We most commonly put the conjunctive adverb after the subject, but we'll see in a moment that we don't always have to do it. Even though this is not in the middle, it still refers back to the first sentence and shows contrast. So the meeting is finished is still in contrast with many people stayed behind to talk. In this case, though, we want to bring some attention to the fact that there are many people, or to the group of many people. By having however after people, we're putting a little more emphasis on one part of the sentence to add a slight extra detail to the connection. Here are some more examples, and please note that the prior sentences are missing here, so you can use your imagination for what comes before. In each case, we have the subject, then however, and then the verb, because most commonly we want to structure it this way to highlight the subject, and again it links back to some kind of idea that comes before this second sentence. But we don't always do that. If we look here, we can see the sentence, the hotel was quite small. But we can insert, however, into different places here. We could say the hotel, however, was quite small. In this case, you're making the reader think about the word hotel. We're putting some extra emphasis on this. In the second one, the hotel was, however, quite small. We're emphasizing the verb was. We might do that if we thought there was some idea that was is surprising to the reader. Like maybe they would have thought the hotel was big, and because it's small, we're going to highlight was. This is just a choice that the writer may want to go with. And finally, we might put however at the end of the sentence. The hotel was quite small, however. This is more of an afterthought, and it's really diminishing the importance of however. It's saying, yes, there's contrast between these ideas, but we're no longer emphasizing the contrast to such a degree. You might notice then that when we insert however, we have two commas around it, but if we put it at the end of the sentence, we have one comma in front of it, just the same as if we put it at the start of the sentence and we have one comma after it. So however is always set apart from the rest of the sentence by one or two commas. Finally, we come to the most uncommon use of however, and this is quite tricky. However can just be an adverb. As you will hopefully know, an adverb modifies a verb and can sometimes modify an adjective. We have however as an adverb of degree, meaning how much, and as an adverb of manner, meaning in what way. So as an adverb of degree, we might say however fast you run. So run is the verb here. You can see it's italicized. And however means a little fast or very fast or super fast. And however difficult, well, difficult is an adjective. So is it a little difficult, quite difficult, very difficult, extremely difficult? So however is modifying that. As an adverb of manner, we mean in what fashion and what style. So dress is the verb. So however you dress means in what way you choose to dress. Note here that when we say however, we don't have the usual punctuation rules and it's not linking any kind of clauses. That's the big difference here, and that's what confuses people. When they see however used this way, or they learn to use however in this way, they quite often have been told, always put a comma after however. And yes, when you're using it as a conjunctive adverb, there's always a comma after however. But this is not a conjunctive adverb. This is an adverb of degree or an adverb of manner, so there's no comma used. We can see that is one of the two big mistakes we should avoid. The first one is a comma splice. I've talked about this a lot. I've probably made a video, and I've definitely got lots of articles on my website about comma splices. Basically, a comma splice is when you have a comma used to join two independent clauses. And in this case, the word however needs different punctuation. Either we need to make this two sentences and have full stop, conjunctive adverb, comma, or we have one sentence with a semicolon, conjunctive adverb, and a comma. In any case, we cannot just link two independent clauses with a comma. Next, we come to mixing parts of speech. And that's what I mentioned just before there. When you say however you choose, so this is an adverb of manner, meaning in what way you choose. We can't just put a comma behind it. We can't put a comma behind it at all because it's not a conjunctive adverb. So these are the two main mistakes that we see with the word however. Right, so to review our lesson for today, the word however is usually a conjunctive adverb, and there are three ways that we can use this conjunctive adverb. We can put it at the start of a new sentence, we can insert it between two independent clauses with a semicolon, or we can insert it into the middle of a sentence to link back to a previous sentence. It can also be an adverb of degree or an adverb of manner, as we can see here. Just a final note, because this is an IELTS channel, and because the word however is used in formal and academic English, it's very commonly going to appear in IELTS writing, in your IELTS essays. So it's a great way of linking your ideas, and it helps you to show connections and to show relationships, and so it's very useful for IELTS students to know. In speaking, you can use however, that's fine, but it's generally less common because the word but is more informal, and in spoken English you're typically more informal in tone and informal in the vocabulary you use. So if you're using very informal words and then you suddenly switch to however, it might sound like you don't have a grasp on what you're saying. In any case, if you have an IELTS test coming up soon, then I wish you the best of luck, and you can find lots more free grammar lessons on this channel and also on my website.